Hi, in today's video I'm going to show you how to set up transmission with the password for the web UI and also a netrc file with the configuration details so that you can use the transmission remote command line tool without being prompted to enter your password. And we're going to set this up on NixOS. There are some things that are NixOS specific, but I'll be showing you a lot of stuff that you can use on your other Linux setup. So first of all, what we're going to be doing is setting up transmission like this and also setting it up so that the browser, in this case Firefox, works with magnet link. So if I click this magnet link, it's prompting me to say, do you want to use this application? I'm going to say always open this application, and in a second it's going to come up with the torrent there. So what I'm going to do is actually show you how you can change a setting in Firefox's config to allow magnet links to work, create a script that will be run with a desktop entry in local share application, so that when you click the link, it opens this desktop file, runs the script, and then adds the torrent to transmission. So first of all, as I said, this is going to be setting this up on NixOS, but there are some issues that I'm going to be covering, like how do you generate the password for the web UI and create the netrc file that you can also use on other versions of Linux. So first of all, NixOS and transmission. If we search for NixOS and transmission, this is all we get. This is all the information that they've actually got on the wiki. Now, if you come across to the manual and you search for services.transmission, what you'll see here is the actual options we can use. So what we've got is services transmission enable. And one thing I should mention is I'm using Home Manager to install transmission. So this is what goes in your configuration.nix file for NixOS. We've got services transmission enable. The next step down here is we've got services transmission credential files. And what this does is this allows us to create a separate file with our login details for transmission. And when we run NixOS rebuild switch, what it's going to do is it's going to take those credential files and add them to the transmission.json file, so that our account details aren't actually in our configuration.nix file that we put on GitHub, because that wouldn't be a good idea. So what I'll do is just go through several of these other options quickly. So extra flags, group. What you can also do is you can run transmission. By default, it runs under its own group, and it will save torrents to var.lib transmission downloads. You can change this to run under your own account and save the torrents to your home directory, but that means that transmission's got access to everything, running under your user, which isn't a good idea. So we're going to be setting this up with transmission running as its own user under var.lib transmission. So we've got transmission home, firewall. We don't need any of this stuff down here. So what I'm going to do is actually switch across to my config.nix. So let's just press transmission. We've got the transmission thing up here, and let's open another tab to our transmission NixOS. Configuration. Okay, so this is all the notes on setting this up, and this corresponds to this document here, which I'll put a link to. So what I'm going to do is actually go through setting this up. So first of all, I've got transmission installed using Home Manager. So what we're going to do is actually going to go through the configuration here. So this is the configuration that is actually going to go in our configuration.nix down here. And what I've done is I've separated it out from the rest of the file just to show you the transmission section. So if I come down here into the configuration.nix, let me just show you what we've got up here is this block services. Okay, and in there what we've got is transmission. So that is the configuration.nix file. So what we got up here is transmission enable equals true. Then we've got credential files, which is varlib secrets transmission settings.json. And what we're going to have to do is actually create that directory and put in a settings.json file, which will contain a username and password that we create using a script called transmission-pwgen. And this is a bash script, but what we have to do is we actually have to change that script because the shebang is bin bash, which doesn't exist on NixOS, so we have to change the shebang. So I'll show you that when we get to it. Then what we've got down here is the home. So this is where everything is stored, so it's varlib transmission. And what this is going to do is this is going to create the configuration for transmission in this directory. Then what we've got down here is this block settings, and this actually corresponds to the settings that would be in your transmission config. So what you can actually do to figure out what all the settings are is you can actually run transmission. Before you actually set this up, what you can do is you can actually run transmission daemon. Won't run it now because it's actually running. And what that will do is that will set up transmission, but that's not the way you need to do it. You've got to set up a service and everything. But what this will actually do is it will actually enable the web UI, and you can configure stuff in the web UI, and it will save it to .config transmission daemon, and you'll then have the settings file, so you can take all your settings and then add them to this block of code here. So what we've got is things like the actual speed. We've got the directory set here, so this is the download directory, and I'm using the default, which is varlib transmission downloads. Got transmission, you've got queue, encryption, the incomplete directory, which will be varlib transmission.incomplete. And what we've got stuff here is like the peer port, and you also need to open that port in your configuration.nix. So if I come down into my configuration.nix into networking, this section down here, what you see is we've got networking, firewall enables equals true, allowed TCP port 6881 and UDP port 6882. So you need to open this port that you're specifying in your firewall. Get a bit of tea there. So the important thing down here is this section, the RPC authentication. It said what we're going to be doing is we're going to be enabling authentication for the web UI, and we'll also set a whitelist so that only people on that people with IPs on that whitelist can access the web UI. So the first thing is RPC authentication required equals true. We've got the bind address set to default. RPC enabled equals true. Whitelist enabled true. The port, these are default here. We set the whitelist, I think it's by default it's 127.0.0.1, which obviously is localhost. So those are the important things in the RPC setup, setting the authentication to true and the whitelist. So some of the other options we've got down here is just like things, trash original torrent files and the watch directory. So that's basically what goes in your configuration.nix. And again, if I show you the whole services block, So again, what we have is services, single curly brace, and then down here we've got the transmission section. I'll put links to that as well. So the next step, obviously editing your configuration, adding that block and opening the port. So again, you need this section down here, networking, your host name, and putting your host name there, network manager enable true, and the firewall ports. So the next step is transmission-pwgen. This is what you would use to actually create the passwords, because what we need to do is actually create two passwords. There's I believe it's a SHA-1 password or something that goes in the configuration for transmission, and then you have a plain text password which you use to log into the web UI, and also with the netrc file, which is a plain text file that we can use to put our login details for transmission, so that we can use it on the command line without being prompted for a username and password. So first thing about this is the shebang. By default, this script uses a bin bash shebang, and there is no bin bash on NixOS. We've got a different file path. So what you have to do is change the shebang to user bin environment bash. Once we've done that, we're good to go. Basically, I'll put a link to the modified version under the video. And what you need to do is put it in your bin directory in your home. So, set up your home. And if I now run transmission-pwgen, what you'll see is it actually prints out a plain text password and an RPC password string. So the plain text password is what you use to log into the web UI and put in the netrc, and the RPC password string is what goes in the transmission config. So what we need to do is actually, after we've done that, what you would basically do is just redirect the output. So redirect the output to password like that password, and you'll see you've got your plain text password and the RPC string. So what we need to do after we've done that is actually create a JSON file, and this is a NixOS step. So what I'll try and do is mention the NixOS step. So what we have to do is create this settings JSON file. So as you see here, this is the example plain text password and RPC password string that we created with the transmission-pwgen script. And now for NixOS, what we need to do is actually create a settings.json file with this format, curly braces, and this has to be done like this: double quotes, RPC password, double quotes, colon, the password in double quotes, that's the RPC password string, needs to be in double quotes, and at the end of the line we have a single comma. In the next line we've got RPC username in double quotes, followed by a colon, and then the username in double quotes but without a colon after there. So there's only one colon, a bit like humans. So that's the format we need for the settings.json file for NixOS that we're going to actually sort of append when transmissions get set up as a service. It's going to take this settings file and add it to the transmission config, but keep it separate from the NixOS configuration.nix file, so that these details aren't in your configuration.nix and then on GitHub. So we ran the script, we created the passwords, we created the settings.json file in this format, the curly braces, the double quotes, colon, the the thing there, and then that's the colon, and the one at the end is the comma, right? So we do that. Now the next step, what we need to do is actually create the directory for that settings.json file. So we run sudo mkdir-p, which means create this directory if it doesn't exist, and the directory path is /var lib secrets transmission. So this is a separate directory. Transmission is running in var lib transmission, and we're creating a directory in var lib secrets transmission so that the settings file isn't in the same directory as transmission. So then what we do is we move that settings file, that settings.json file, into place. So sudo mv settings.json var lib secrets transmission. Now what we need to do at this stage is run sudo nix rebuild switch. And what this is going to do is going to set up the service and everything and create the transmission group. And after we've done that, what we need to do is run sudo chown -R root transmission var lib secrets, so that the transmission daemon has access to that file, I think, because I couldn't get it to work otherwise. And so this has got to be run after you've run sudo nix rebuild switch, because the transmission group isn't created till you do that. Now, one thing is you may need to you then need to reboot. If it's not working, what you may need to do is actually go into var lib transmission. So let me see if I come into here, just in case this issue bites you. Because we couldn't set the permissions on the directory till after we'd run sudo nix rebuild switch, it may have not actually added the options. So var lib transmission. So this is the directory where transmission will be running in NixOS, and as you can see here, we've got the watch directory, incomplete, and downloads directory where the torrents go, and the .config directory. So this is like the .config directory in your home. I believe you can also set transmission to actually store the config in your home as well. But if I look in the .config directory, transmission daemon, what you'll see here is the settings.json file, and in that file, the settings.json file we created with our account details will get added. Now, if you've set this up and you try to log in and it's not working, what you may need to do is actually delete this config directory and then run NixOS rebuild switch again. And what it will do is it recreate the .config directory and the settings.json file and import the our settings, our account details. So that's the next step. So that's just some NixOS specific stuff. So if you're on other versions of Linux and you've been hanging around, sorry about all the Nix OS specific stuff, but it's just there's no documentation about getting this set up. So bugged me, and I wanted to go through the whole process of getting this working like you would on a regular desktop. So next step, what we're going to be doing is creating what's called a netrc file, and what this will do is it's a plain text file that contains login details that we can use with transmission remote. So what we do is we create a .netrc file in our home, so that's ~/.netrc, and this is a bit that had me stumped for a while actually getting this working. What you need to do is put in 4 things: the machine, which in this case is going to be localhost, the login, which is the username that you've added in your I've got this in here. Okay, where is it? I had it in here. Where's the users? I thought I had it set up in this bit somewhere. Where's the user? I thought I had the user set up in here. Is the user? Hang on, let me just check. Where the? Yeah, okay. So my bad. So the username isn't set in the configuration.nix. It's set in that settings.json file. So sorry. So back to the netrc. So the machine localhost, the login is the username that if you're on NixOS, it's going to be the settings.json file that we created with our account details. If you're just using Linux regularly, it's going to be in your transmission.config, .json or whatever it's called. Now, these are the two things this is the bit that had me stumped. You need to put in the password and the account. And these are when we ran the transmission-pwgen script, it created the plain text password and the RPC password. This is the plain text password you need to put in. And you need to put in password and account with the same thing. So machine, login, password and account is the same thing. And then we change the permissions on that file. So I've got this set up. So what happens now is if I come to the downloads directory, you'll see we've got a Big Buck Bunny torrent there. So what I can do is I can run transmission remote-a, which is short for add, and then that torrent. You can see success. If I come across here, you see it's now downloading. Okay. So you can see that the transmission remote command is using the netrc file, and it's automatically using the username, password, and account to log into transmission through RPC and add the torrent. So that's the command line sorted. So we can run transmission remote and all the commands. So I can run transmission remote -l, which is for list. You can see there's nothing there. If I do add and then list, you'll see it's saying that that's been added. So you can see all the transmission remote commands. Well, not all, but I'm not going to show you them all. But the transmission remote commands are working with the netrc file, so that's all good. So you can use this with remote seed boxes and things like that as well. So that's another handy thing. So next step, so setting up Firefox and getting magnet links to open in transmission. And I also want to cover a few gotchas of actually running transmission in varlib transmission as opposed to your home. So Firefox, what we need to do is open Firefox about config, paste in this bit of code, click the plus button and set the value to false. I've already done that, so let's go through that procedure. About config. So this is about :config. So this would be the same if you're on any version of Linux. So we paste that in, and I've already done this. If you haven't already done this, you'll get a little plus button here. Click that, and when it's been added, click it to false. So that's what you need to do. And what I'm going to do is on my home manager set up for Firefox, what I'm going to be doing is adding that configuration option to my build of Firefox so that it's automatically set. So you can either do that through your about config, or you can use a user.js file with that option in your Firefox profile to set that. Once we've done that, what we need to do is actually move on to the next step, which is actually having a script and a desktop file. So what we're going to have here is a simple shell script. So what we've got here in this, let me actually open the script in magnet add. So what we've got is a simple shell script. And reason we always want to write shell scripts on NixOS because we've got a bin sh. You should always write shell scripts instead of bash scripts, but on NixOS we have a bin sh but no bin bash, so said you've got to change the shebang for bash files. So what we've got here, if the script is run without any arguments, exit. So if we just run this script and don't give it a torrent file or a magnet link, it's just going to exit. And then all we've got down here is transmission remote -- add, and this option here, which basically means all the arguments passed to this script. So we should be able to use this script to either on the command line or being launched through Firefox. So this is the script that's actually going to be launched when we click a magnet link in Firefox, and that is then going to send that magnet link to transmission. The other thing is I need to mention is the watch directory, because normally you download a torrent file, it goes into your downloads directory, and then transmission will automatically start downloading that torrent. The watch directory is a different directory in this setup, so that's something else I need to mention. So that's the script. So what we do is we take that script, we put it in our bin directory, make it executable. Now the next step is the .desktop file. So again, this is for NixOS and any version of Linux. So we've got the magnet script that's going to be run. Now what we need is a desktop file. So what you actually need to do is you can't just run a script from that thing. What you need to do is have a desktop file that is going to be associated with the script and run it when we click the magnet link. So what we do is we create a transmission.desktop file in local share applications. So that's ~/.local share applications transmission.desktop. And in this file, we're going to have this bit of code. And the one thing that you need to do is actually change the path to the script. So home and then your username here, bin magnet add. That's all you need to do, is create that file with this bit of code in here, and then just change this section here to your username. And then once we've done that, that's the whole setup. We're all good to go. And as you can see here, when I click a magnet link, it doesn't look like it's doing anything, but that's because I've automatically allowed it, and it's downloading the Simpsons. Well, it's not actually downloading the Simpsons. For copyright reasons, I'm not going to do anything like that. I'm just showing you the process of actually getting the magnet links to work in Firefox. So the directories where stuff is installed, close that out. So what the issue is with transmission is, so there's two ways to run it. Let me just switch back here to the manual. Okay, the transmission home, so, and the transmission user, where's the user? So services transmission group. There's a section on the Arch Wiki about this as well. So if I just come across to the Arch Wiki transmission, say please. Okay, there we go, transmission. So this section down here, choosing a user, choose how you want to run transmission. As a separate user, transmission by default recommended for increased security. So by default, transmission runs as a separate user in a separate directory from your home, that it doesn't have anything in your home. So by default it creates a user and group called transmission with its home in varlib transmission and runs as this user. This is the security proportion, so transmission and its download have no access to files outside of varlib transmission. Configuration option and access to downloads needs to be done with root privilege, e.g. by using sudo. But you can also set this to actually run as your own user and create the downloads directory in your home if you want. And I said the issue is that normally if I'd come across and like if I come across to, hang on, I've still got the big butt bunny file in here. So normally if you've got transmission set up running as your own user, set up to save all the files into your home directory, what you can do is you can set what's called a watch directory, and this is a directory that transmission will watch and monitor for added torrent files and then automatically add them to transmission. So normally, you know, you'll be used to downloading a torrent file to your downloads folder and having it automatically started, but as you can see, there's a torrent file in there and is not automatically being added, and that's because the watch folder is in varlib.transmission, and we can't, if we wanted transmission to monitor our downloads folder in our home, we'd have to grant transmission access to home, your username and your downloads directory, so you'd have to grant permissions for transmission to be able to access the downloads folder. So that doesn't make any sense. You might as well just run it as a user. So to move that, to get that to be downloaded, what we actually need to do, we're going to have to switch to sudo, so that we've actually got permission to move that file to the watch directory, and I need to enter my password again. Okay, so now I can let's copy that file to varlib transmission watch directory. Once I do that, you can see it's automatically been added. So that's another gotcha about running transmission as its own user as opposed to under your user account, is that all those things like adding torrent files from the downloads folder will require a bit of jigging about, and also if you want to cd varlib transmission downloads, you then have to move the downloads from this directory to your home, to another directory, and as you can see, everything is going to be owned by the transmission user and group. So if you wanted to delete the directories and the torrents, you'd have to do it with sudo, or you could change the permissions. So so let's do it with that password file. So you can see here, this is a file that I created and it's running under my user and users. So if I change that to sudo chown transmission, will it autocomplete? Yep, transmission password. So by default, all your torrent files are going to have these permissions set to transmission. So if you wanted to change the permissions, what you can do is sudo chown user, and you need to do user in a specific way. So you need to write it like this with the curly brackets, and then users, password, and for recursive, what we'd do, bastard. So suppose this password file is a directory of loads of torrents that you just moved, and they're all set to transmission. What you'd do is you'd run sudo chown -r, which means recursive, $ curly braces, user capital use curly braces, colon users, and then the file. And you'll then see that the permissions have been correctly changed to your user name and the user's group. So that's something else that you just need to sort of bear in mind. So hopefully that will get you started getting transmission working on NixOS, because to say I was disappointed with the documentation is an understatement, to put it mildly. Basically, this just gives you links to this, which is okay. You can figure out what the settings are and take the settings from transmission. But setting up the password with the credentials file wasn't obvious. So what I'm going to do is just go through a quick recap of getting all these things set up in case you've forgotten any bits. So let's start off with the NixOS specific thing, the transmission config. So what we had here is the this goes in the, remember the services. We've got the services equals curly braces and then end curly brace down there, and this is the transmission setup. So transmission enable equals true, credential file equals varlib secrets transmission settings.json. The home is varlib transmission. Then we have the settings, and again these are the settings for that you'd get in the transmission config. So we've got all these settings down here, like the download directory, DHT enabled, encryption, the incomplete directory enabled, the port. Remember, you've got to open the port in your NixOS config as well. So there's the network. Remember this section down here, the network. But the important thing was the RPC section down here. So this is both for NixOS and for general versions of Linux on how you get the RPC working. RPC authentication required equals true. Bind address, just leave it at the default. RPC enabled equals true. Whitelist enabled equals true. Port and the whitelist, and this is the IP addresses that are allowed to use the web UI. So that's the transmission block of code for the service that goes in your configuration.nix. And again, remember, open the ports, networking, hostname, firewall enabled true, TCP port 6881, UDP port 6882. So after we'd opened the ports, then what we needed to do was generate the password. So again, this is the transmission password script. I'll put a link to this. And the one thing that we did was we changed the shebang from bin bash to user bin environment bash. And what I found was I whacked up the password length to 64 and it wouldn't let me log in with a password that length. So I just changed it back to the default in the script, which was 16. And again, what this does is this creates the two strings, the plaintext password and the RPC password string. Plaintext password is what's used to log into the web UI in the browser and also in the netrc file that we use with the transmission remote. And the RPC password string is what goes in the transmission config and on NixOS in the settings.json file that we add as a secret. So for NixOS, what we had to do, we had to create this settings.json file with the RPC password. So again, the format, the curly braces, double quotes, RPC password, double quote, colon, double quote, the password, then a comma, then the RPC username, and that's going to be the username that you log in with the web UI and netrc. And this one doesn't have a comma at the end, so that's important. So after we'd done that, what we needed to do on NixOS was create the directory sudo mkdir-p varlib secrets transmission. We moved the settings file into place, sudo mv setting.json varlib secrets transmission. We needed to then rebuild NixOS. So we ran sudo nixos rebuild switch, and what that does is that sets up the service and creates the transmission group. And then what we did was we changed the permissions on the varlib secrets directory so that transmission could actually read that. I'm not sure if that's totally needed, but I had so many issues getting this working and different permutations. I think it might be so that it can import it when it sort of runs. And again, if you have any issues, if you then reboot and you can't log in, what you may need to do again is remove the .config directory in varlib transmission and do a NixOS rebuild switch again, reboot, and then it should import the username and password. So that's the NixOS specific stuff. Then the netrc file. So again, this is the text file that will contain the username and password so that we can use transmission remote even though RPC authentication is enabled, and it's going to use the details from this file so that we can run commands on the command line to add, remove torrents and magnet files and that sort of thing. So what we did was we created the ~/.netrc file, and this contains these 4 lines. These can actually be put on a single line as well if you like. So what we've got is machine, localhost, the login, which is your username on NixOS. That's defined in the settings.json file. On other versions of Linux, it'd be in your transmission config. And then what we had to do was put in the password, and this is again the plain text password from the transmission-pwgen script, and also the account. It took me a while to figure out that option was needed to get as well, because I had all this set up and just couldn't figure out why it wasn't working. Then finally, what we need to do is change the permissions on that, change mod 600 ~/.netrc. Then again, we went onto Firefox. We opened Firefox about config. We pasted in this code, network.protocol-handler.expose.magnet. You click the little plus button, you double click it and set it to false. And now that will enable magnet link support in Firefox. Then the 2 things that we had to do was actually create a script that's going to be run the transmission remote add command to actually add a torrent file or a magnet link. So we add this block of code here. So the script's run without any arguments, doesn't do anything. Otherwise, it runs transmission remote add and all the arguments pass to the script. And finally, what we did was we created the desktop file for transmission. So nano ~/.local share applications transmission.desktop, and we added this block of code. And the one thing you need to change is one word here. So you need to change this to your username. Make sure that's the correct path of the script. Also make sure the magnet script's executable, but it already is. So when you download the link I'll give you, whack it in your bin directory, change this line here, and you're good to go. So that's basically all the setup we needed to do. Again, some of this is NixOS specific, but there are some things that hopefully, if you're on another version of Linux, that you'll find useful in how you set up the password, edit your transmission config to use RPC authentication and the whitelist, creating a netrc file so you can use transmission remote script on the command line, setting up Firefox with the magnet link support. And so finally what we've got is transmission here. And what I wanted to do was mention a couple of things. There's no, if you're NixOS, there's no point changing the configuration options in here because they're set in the configuration.nix file and will just be overwritten. So was there anything else that I needed to mention about this while I think about it? So all the magnet links work. As I said, let me just download some torrents and see if I can add multiple torrents at once. Actually, archive.org big fuck funny. So problem I want to solve here is normally you're going to come across and download the torrent file. Okay, it's downloaded, and you're running transmission as your own as your user. It would pick up the torrent file from the download directory, but as I explained, we can't give it access to the download directory when we're running transmission as a separate user. So we're going to have to come up with a workaround. So if we want to manually add torrents, we've got to move them to that varlib transmission.watch directory, and that requires sudo permissions, which is going to be a pain. So we've taken care of the magnet links. Okay, so in here we can come and click a magnet link. It's going to run the desktop file and the script and add it here. But what about torrent file? So what we want to do is actually download the torrent. So Night of the Living Dead. So what we want to do, Night of the Living Dead, is if we can use that magnet add script to add multiple torrent files at once rather than adding them individually. Okay, there we go. So come to the downloads. Okay, so I've actually downloaded it several times. So let me just get rid of the duplicates. Okay. So what we've got here is 2 torrent files. So what we want to do is we want to run. We don't want to run the magnet. We could run the magnet add script because it'll do the same thing. But we could just run transmission-a. We run transmission remote-a .torrent. Will that work? See if it's added both of those. Night of the Living Dead. Gonna add both of them. Okay, so that way didn't work. So what we're gonna do, what I was trying doing here is transmission remote add wildcard.torrent. It didn't add. So let's just use the magnet add script. If that will add multiple. No, that's still just only adding one. So the wildcard doesn't work. So let's do transmission remote add and both of them. See if that will work and add both of them that are Living Dead. Okay, so what seems to be happening is it's only handling one at a time. So even let me see if the magnet add will do. Magnet add, Big Buck Bunny, and Night of the Living Dead. Yeah, so it's not adding both. What I was hoping was you could have a way of just running one command adding multiple torrent files. Big Buck Bunny, transmission, remote, add Night of the Living Dead. Okay, so now they're both coming up. So that's something to work on. What's an easy way to add multiple torrents rather than actually moving in, because you'd have to do the issue on the other issue is that you actually got to switch to sudo completely. You got to, on NixOS, you've got to run sudo su, and I'll show you why. So if I run sudo mv Big Buck Bunny, and now what I want to do is put in the path to the watch directory in transmission, and I'll show you the problem. So var lib, so autocomplete. I'm pressing tab to autocomplete here. Transmission, so I'm autocompleting. But now, when I tab, I'm not getting auto-completion, and that's because of directory issues. So if I know the name of the directory is watch -dir. So if I still don't get auto-completion. So what you got to do is run sudo su. Okay, so now I'm root. Now if I run mv Big Buck Bunny var lib transmission w tab, going to autocomplete to the watch directory. So that's the issue, is just running sudo on its own, you're not going to get the autocompletion for the watch directory, and so you're going to have to type watch, so that's just a pain. Or you're going to have to switch to sudo. I suppose you could add yourself to the transmission group. That would be another option. But I don't know if there's any sort of security implications for that. So what I'll do is I'll put links to all this under the video. So this is the NixOS transmission thing. This is the manual with the actual options for running the transmission service. What you can also do on NixOS is actually run this as a container as well, which is sort of, it's like kind of running, it's like kind of a Docker kind of thing, where it's sort of running a sort of container that's separate from the host, but you've got to kind of do more sort of setup, and I wasn't sure if there were any issues with the networking. But I just wanted to get it set up to this stage where, you know, it was like a regular desktop setup you'd normally have. So that is another option. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I have tested this working over VPN as well, and that works. So setting this up like this on NixOS, I have a script that I use with private internet access, PIA, to connect to VPN to download. You know, so I run the VPN and transmission to download, air quotes, Linux distributions, and that works fine. Works exactly the same, perfectly, no issues at all. So transmission's working fine under your regular networking, but also over a VPN using private internet access. So another thing I wanted to mention. So I put links to this. So this is the actual documentation I've been going through. This is the actual configuration for that you put in your transmission, in your configuration.nix. Open the ports. We've got the password generation script. This is what it outputs. We created the JSON file, created the directories, the RC, Firefox, Magnet. So all that's there. All the steps are there, and I'll put links to these sort of files where you can just download these as well. So for instance, in my dotfiles is the transmission desktop, and obviously if you're on GitHub, what you need to do is you come across the raw, and then you save the files like that. So don't try and save them like this, like on this page. You need to click the raw button like that. So there's the desktop entry. So this is my NixOS dot file, so you can see really minimal here. Those are all the things in my config, and this is the actual document which sets up home manager and everything else. And then what we've got here is the root.file. So I've got root.files for a Dell XPS 15 and also a MacBook Air 2011 11-inch 4GB RAM. So if I come across to the configuration.nix here, what you'll see is if I scroll down to the services, this is what it looks like, services. Then we've got transmission block here with all the settings, and you'll see the username and password aren't in this configuration. They're in that separate settings.json file that kind of gets imported when we run NixOS rebuild switch. And then what that does is that appends those options to the transmission.json configuration file. So that's the configuration.nix, and this is the my NixOS bin directory. So again, this is the what was I looking for? The transmission. So we've got two things in here. We've got the magnet add script, and we got the transmission-pwgen script. And again, the only thing I've changed in this script is the actual shebang, user bin environment bash. And again, that's needed because there's no bin bash on NixOS. And finally, we got the transmission wiki here with some more options. And as I said, what you can do is you can either run transmission as its own user or under your user account. But I just wanted to make things more secure, run it as its own user, and I also wanted to set up the password. And then I just got into this rabbit hole of trying to get these things to work. So just at every turn, there was just things to actually figure out along the way, getting this working. The netrc, that was one that had me stumped for ages. You need the account as well, and also getting Firefox set up with the magnet link support. So we've got magnet link support working here, and we've got a way to actually add torrents on the command line as well. But again, you need to use sudo to access the downloads, and you probably want to change the permissions as I showed you using the chown command. So hopefully that's everything. I haven't missed anything out along the way. But as I said, yeah, this took a little bit of while to get set up, because if you search for NixOS and transmission, there's a video here, but this is basically there's a thing called My NixOS, which is a website that allows you to sort of build configuration for different things, and it was just a demonstration of that service and not actually a video that would give you any help getting this set up on NixOS. So literally there's that wiki. There's an interesting thing here, transmission daemon on NixOS. So this is Zhao Dong. I was going to call him Mr. Dong, but that sounds a bit like a porn star name. But this is how you can get transmission working as a container on NixOS. I might look at how you can do this, but one thing I wanted to see was actually how the networking would work, and if it would work with a VPN and how much extra setup there would be involved in that. So I just wanted to get the bleeding thing working first of all before I got more advanced and looked into things like containers. So again, there's literally nothing. There's a few configuration files about sort of getting things set up, but nothing that would actually point you to some of the issues that are sort of cropped up with NixOS, and also getting the transmission netrc file. So if I run transmission netrc, yeah, there's one thing from back here in 2014. The guy saying, he was sort of trying some configuration and some option that wasn't working. And he didn't have the account in here, but I found for some reason I needed to have the machine, the login, the password, and the account. Maybe just specific to my setup or something, but I just thought I'd mention all of that. So that's a wrap up of getting NixOS working with transmission, or transmission working with NixOS, whichever way you want to look at it. So that we've got something that's, more sort of familiar to you as a sort of desktop user, but as I said, there are some issues you've kind of got to take into account. As I said, you can run this as your own user, under your own user, but that's not as secure. So I've gone the secure route, running transmission under its own user, password protecting the UI, and that's the other thing that I wanted to mention is when you open transmission, the URL here. So I don't actually want to do this because I'm going to show you my password, but when you run transmission like this, what it's going to do is it's going to come up with a little pop-up menu, a little drop-down box for your username and password. You put that in, but for some reason Firefox doesn't remember the details. So if I come into my settings, privacy and security, cookie and site data. So what you can do in Firefox is say delete cookies and site data when Firefox is closed, manage exceptions. And what you can do is you can put in a URL, and so this is the maybe I need to change the URL here. See if I can get this to work now. So if I put that in, I think I was doing it incorrectly with another URL. We'll put in the URL here, 127 transmission web allow, and see if that works. Does that not come up? Let me remove that website, put it back in. Okay, yeah, it's still coming up as this, save changes. What I found is that because it's not a regular web form, Firefox doesn't seem to save the login. It doesn't save the cookies. So if I just come back across here, if it actually yeah, that's what I was saying. So this is what happens when you open up transmission. You put in your username and your password, you sign in, but unfortunately what happens is because it's not like a web form, it doesn't set cookies or something. I don't know what it is, but even if you have the settings down here, manage exceptions, you put in the URL, save the changes, it still doesn't save the cookie, and you get prompted to log in. So you may be completely that's too annoying, but as I said, you can use this stuff on the command line without a prompt. It's just every time you open the browser, you're going to have to put in the username and password, which is a bit of a pain, and I think that's just an issue with that it's not an actual form, but like a drop-down authentication that you'd kind of get with like Apache or something like that. So that was just the other thing I wanted to mention. So that's transmission. We come back to that document. So that's all the steps, the config, using transmission password, setting the RPC password, netrc, Firefox setup with the magnet add script and the desktop files. So you can get everything working with RPC authentication for transmission on the command line and in the browser. It's just there's a few gotchas. And again, there's a few gotchas if you're running transmission as its own user. You've got to do some stuff as sudo and then probably change the permissions of the downloaded files afterwards. So that's all for now, and I'll put links to all this under the video. Hope that's helped you if you're on NixOS, but also, although there was a lot of NixOS specific stuff in there, I hope some of the tips about using the transmission password script and netrc and setting up Firefox might help you if you're on another Linux distribution anyway. So that's all for now. Stick links to all this under the video, and I'm out of here.